Hi, my name is Seth Penn. I just want to make a quick little video to show you guys a little bit about my Ableton Live template. So I've created a template that I use every single week to build tracks and create live sessions. So I'm just going to dive right into it and check it out. So I'm going to use the live browser here rather than Finder, and just going to navigate to the folder where my template is held. So I have this folder for templates, open it up, and it's this CP Live template. So I'm just going to double click that. So this is my template. One thing I love about using a template is it's just a huge time saver and creates a much more efficient way for me to set up my session. I know I'm going to set up the session the same way every single time. So this just helps me do that a lot quicker. So I'm just going to give a quick overview here. First thing you'll see are all my tracks. So the first track I have here is click, I have count, and then I have an IC track. This is another IC MIDI track, but I've just labeled it Cue next. This is a trigger prop track we use to trigger Pro Presenter. This is a pad track, bass, EG2, and EG1. And then going on down the line, my outputs here, these are return tracks, which I use for all my outputs for all my songs. So I have drums, synth, Vox, bass, EG2, EG1, synth bass. So I'm just going to start back at the top here with our click track. And just a couple quick things that I've done. I've made a click EQ here that just rolls off some lows and highs for our ears, so it sounds a little better. And then I have a master limiter and Ableton utility plugin set to mono on any track that I need to come out a mono output. So the click has that, and it's coming out of external out 1. So on my interface, that'll come out of channel 1. The count comes out of channel 2. And that doesn't have the EQ, but it does have the mono and the limiter. This next track is IAC. I'm going to spend most of my time talking about that because it is an incredible, powerful tool inside of Ableton. And it's not really an easy thing to figure out on your own or to find. So we'll get to that, but this is a MIDI track and the output is set to the IEC driver MIDI device on channel 2. We'll get to that later. Cue next is another IEC track, so it's on IEC driver channel 3. And then trigger prop is going out to my network session. We use that to control Pro Presenter cues. So over Wi-Fi or Cat5 cable, I can send out to my network session MIDI device and trigger that way. This pad track is another really cool thing. So on this pad track, it's just an audio track. And this is where I will drop in audio files that I've created that are just pads that we use for transitions. And most of the time, they're just hanging on a 1 chord. And then on this audio track, I just have a filter cutting off some of the high end, low pass filter, and then an Ableton reverb unit here. And I've got the decay time really high, up to 10.7 seconds. Size is all the way up to 500, and my dry wet mix is 85%. And then I also have just my limiter on there. The reason I do this with the reverb is there may be times that we're playing this pad track, and rather than it cutting off harshly when the pad stops, it's going to have a nice tail. So I can put this in a loop, and whenever I trigger out of the loop, you're going to notice the pad just nicely fades out on its own. Or if I just stop tracks and I stop the pad track, it's not just going to harsh cut off. It's going to fade out with a nice tail. So yeah, I'll just drop audio files on there for my pad. And these next tracks, so normally when I bring tracks in, I have a group for each song. So all of the tracks for that song are in that group. But because we often use live bass or live EG2, which we call rhythm, or EG1, which is lead, a lot of times we may not have a player for those. So we'll need to turn those tracks on, and they're going down separate outputs than the other tracks. So I like to just have my groups for each song and then have these 3 tracks all separate on their own. So all the bass EG2 and EG1 files are on those tracks for all the songs, similarly to how I have the click and count. So there's not a click and count track for each song, just those files are all on these top 2 tracks. But that's kind of the basic setup. So I want to go ahead and dive into this IEC track because, like I said before, it was a huge game changer for me. So the first thing you're going to need to do is come down here to Audio MIDI Setup. This is a built-in device in your Mac. It's in Applications and then the Utilities folder. I also have it on my dock here because I use it so frequently. So this application has 2 windows. There is the MIDI Studio and the audio devices. Sometimes when you open this program, it's going to open whatever you last had. So the first time, it probably will open audio devices. So I just want the MIDI Studio. So again, go up to Window, Show MIDI Studio, or Command 2 on the keyboard. And this is just every MIDI device that you've ever connected to your computer. They're grayed out because they're not plugged in currently. But what we do have is the IAC driver. Now, if you've never done this, it will probably also be grayed out. So all you got to do is double click it and this window will pop up. And if you've never done this, devices online will be unchecked. You just need to check it. Then hit apply. I'm going to close this since I've already done it. Now, once you do that, IEC driver is going to show up as a MIDI device on your computer. And you can use this as a MIDI device to internally route MIDI notes. So I'm going to close this and come back to live. And the way you set this up is insert a MIDI track. So Shift Command T. And I'm just going to drag this up here. Command R to rename it. IAC. You can name it whatever you want, but since that's what it is, I'm going to name it that. And we actually don't need an input. And we want to set our output to IAC driver bus 1. Now, if you do this and have a MIDI note on here, it's still not really going to fire anything. You need to come into Live's Preferences, Command, comma, go to the Link MIDI tab, and then you should see IAC driver bus 1 in your input and your output. So all we really need is the remote button on for the input. That just means we're going to control Ableton Live remotely with this MIDI device. And then on the output, all I need turned on is the track. So when it's receiving that, it's going to track that MIDI note, and I don't need remote or sync on for that as well. So once those settings are there, they're always going to stay that way as well. So like I said about the IAC driver device in Audio MIDI Setup, you turn it on once, it's on forever unless you change it. You turn these settings on in Live's Preferences, they're on forever unless you change it. So now that's all set up. So when you put a MIDI clip on this track, you can then map that MIDI note to any mappable MIDI parameter in Live. It's pretty easy in Live. There's a button up here in the top right that says MIDI. Everything turns purple that you can map. You can also hit Command M to turn that on and off. So I'm going to come over here to the end of my session. And a big part of my template is the fact that I've created a lot of these MIDI clips in advance and saved them into the template. So I don't have to make them again when I want to use them in my session. And that's the huge time saver. And I'll show you how I created them and why I wanted to save them in my template so I don't have to do this every single time. So one of the biggest things that we use for this IAC track is a stop trigger. When I hit play in a range view, my playhead starts going. When I want the song to stop, normally you'd have to catch the playhead again. So hit play, hit it again. I can use this MIDI IAC track to automatically stop for me. To create a MIDI clip on this IAC track, just select any amount of time, right click, and click Insert MIDI Clips or Shift Command M. So now you have a blank MIDI clip. There's no notes on it. If you don't already have the piano roll at the bottom, you can double click the region. It'll open the piano roll. You can also click this little triangle to show and hide that. So I'm going to just expand it a little bit. And you just have to draw a MIDI note on here. It really doesn't matter what note it is. You just have to make sure if you're creating multiple MIDI clips that you don't want the same note mapped to two different parameters. So I'll just start down here. I'll start up high actually, because I know I don't have anything mapped there. So I just double clicked in the piano roll to draw a MIDI note. Now, this is in here. I don't have to mess with the velocity. I don't have to mess with the length of the note. All I need is for the note to be on this clip so that it can be sent out of this track. So now I have this. I also will rename it just so I know what function I'm about to do. And if you hit Command M, I'll delete my mapping here. You can see our stop button is mappable. So all you have to do is cue up where you're going to play from. So this is the tricky part, because normally you can click a MIDI parameter, hit it on your keyboard or your controller, and it just maps it. This, we have to tell Ableton how to get that MIDI note. And the only way we can get it in a range view is to play this MIDI clip. So I first want to cue up by just clicking in the timeline right before that clip. Then I'm going to click my stop button because that's what I want to map, and then hit spacebar to play. And as you see there, it mapped the note I drew, C5, to my stop button. Hit Command M to get out of MIDI mapping mode, and then hit play. And as you can see, it stops my playhead for me. Really handy, just a time saver, one less thing for me to worry about live on stage. So I'm going to delete this. Just showed you guys how we created it. One other thing that is really cool to do with the IC driver is to create loops. I have just gone and pre-made 6 loops here and have them at the end of my template again so I can save time, pull those in when I need them. But rather than mapping a MIDI clip to a button, you can also map MIDI clips to locators. So I'll show you guys this again from scratch. So I'm going to create a MIDI clip here, right click, insert MIDI clip. We'll just add G#3, why not? And I'll call this loop 1. Now I'm going to create a locator here by right clicking up top, add locator, and we'll name it loop 1. So now I want to map this MIDI clip to this locator. Same way we mapped it to the stop button, but this locator instead. So again, cue up your spot that you're going to play from, Command M to go into mapping mode, then click your locator without clicking anywhere else so it doesn't move your selection point. Hit play, and now you've mapped it. So obviously you can do more with this than looping, but the main application for me is, say I want to create a 2-bar loop. I put this loop locator at the first bar of my loop, and then I put my loop MIDI clip on the second bar. Let me drag in some click just so we can hear an actual loop. So here's a click track, dragging it onto my click. And I'll just make it 2 bars. So as you can see, that MIDI clip is being triggered every time the playhead hits that MIDI clip. It's going back to that locator. Now this also really only works with this bar if you have your global quantization set to 1 bar. That's the default in Ableton, so unless you changed it, you wouldn't have to worry about this. But if you come over here, you can change your global quantization. And that's going to tell Live what quantization value it wants to fire any live trigger. So anytime that I'm triggering a locator, it's going to wait to complete the bar before it does anything else. So because it's playing, it's going to complete that bar before it loops to the locator. So you can see it lights up green when it first gets triggered, but it waits to complete the bar. So if I set this to half, you'll see it triggers halfway through the bar. I'll zoom in a little bit. See that? If I change it to quarter note, it's going to trigger after 1 quarter note. So if you're wanting to create even bar loops that don't cut off your bars of click early, you want it set to 1 bar. So that's how you make a loop. Really handy. Again, I have 6 of those pre-made just so I don't have to make them every single time. And one last thing I want to show is the cue next. This is maybe my favorite feature of the IEC that I'm using. I want to create as few button pushes on stage as I possibly can, so I don't have to worry about what's happening in tracks, because 9 times out of 10, I'm playing an instrument while running the tracks. So the less things I have to click or press, the better. So something I run into is I play song 1. A lot of times it'll just flow into song 2 in a range view, and I don't have a stop cue. But sometimes we need that track to stop. Something else happens musically, and then I need to cue up song 2 and hit play again. So I can turn those 2 actions into one by having this cue next track. I'll go ahead and delete my IC there. So I still have my IC and my cue next over here. The cue next is just another IC track. So all I really did is click the IC, hit Command D to duplicate it. And I went ahead and changed the channel, MIDI channel, to channel 3, just so I don't have to worry about overlapping notes. So I can have C# -2 mapped in channel 2, and I can have C# -2 mapped in channel 3, and they won't conflict. So I'm just going to delete that. But that's my cue next. And so all it is exactly what I showed you guys a second ago, where this MIDI clip, I'll drag it out here, is mapped to the next locator. So when my playhead hits this, it's going to fire locator 2. Now the problem is I want things to be stopped. When you fire a locator in a range view while the playhead is going, it's a live trigger. I don't want it to play when I click it. I just want it to queue up, and then I hit play when I'm ready. If I put my song 2 MIDI clip here, right under the stop trigger on the same bar, and I hit play, you'll see it's still going to trigger song 2's locator. So it's missing the stop trigger completely. The way you can get around this is with track delay. So it's not going to be on by default. So you want to come up here to view, turn on track delay, and you'll see it just went away. So now you can see it pop up right there to the right of all your tracks. And if you delay this cue next track by 50 milliseconds, what's going to happen is the playhead's going to hit both MIDI clips. It's going to receive the stop MIDI clip and stop the playhead, but it also received the cue next MIDI clip, but it's waiting 50 milliseconds before it takes action. So what's going to happen is if I hit play right here, it stops, and then it automatically jumps to my next locator without playing. So I'll show you that again. Play, stop, cue up next song. So now all I really have to worry about in my session is hitting play for song 1, and then if the playhead stops and is queued up to another song, I just hit play for that song as well. In addition, whatever our last song is, I have a song 1 MIDI clip cue for that. So normally we get to the end of the set, and for us at church, we're doing multiple services in a day. So you get to the end of your set, Ableton stops with the stop cue, but then you still have to come back out and cue up song 1 and hit play. My last song ends, playhead stops, and jumps us back to song 1. So we're ready to go for the next service. So I think that's all I've got time for today, but I wanted to show you guys some of my favorite features with my live template and the IAC driver. Thanks.